Hi, good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Semi Conversations podcast. I am your host, Bradley Donner, and alongside me is my co host, Miss Stephanie Simon. This evening, our guest is Mr. Lyndon Alves, a specialist meteorologist. Mr. Alves holds a BSc in physics from La Universidad de Oriente, a university in Cuba. He also holds a diploma in meteorology from the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, located in Barbados. Mr. Alves also has a master's in geosciences, specializing in applied meteorology from Mississippi State University in the USA. Mr. Alves has been working in meteorology since 2010 and have been the head of the short and medium range forecasting and aeronautical meteorology since 2011. Mr. Alves, welcome to the Semi Conversations podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here with you guys tonight.
All right, so we will be talking about your career as a meteorologist. I think that's an interesting career. That's one we've always seen and heard of, especially as a little boy. You hear it on the radios, the weather person's giving the forecast. Can you describe a day in the life of a meteorologist, or a day in the life of what you do exactly?
Okay, well, first of all, there are different types of meteorology, different branches of meteorology. It's like a doctor, you have different specializations, different specialties. In meteorology, you have different specialties also. Now, in my case, I am what you refer to as an operational forecaster in the short and medium range public forecasting and also aeronautical forecasting. Now, short and medium range forecasts, I'm referring to your forecasts for uh, between 3 to 7 days. And aeronautical is we provide forecasts and warnings for the aviation community, for the civil aviation community. So we would inform pilots as to areas of maybe thunderstorms, areas of turbulence, lightning, icing, volcanic ash, and a whole host of other hazards that may affect the the flights. It's not just during the time of flight, but also while the plane is still on the ground. So those are some of the tasks or some of the duties that we have. So a typical day is, well, our shifts are pretty long. We have 2 shifts daily. So the day shift is from 7:30 in the morning to 6:15 in the night. And the night shift is from 6 in the night to 7:45 the next day. So when you come in the morning, well, you're briefed as to what would have transpired the previous shift. So like I'm working a night shift today. So when I came in this afternoon, the person who works today, the other forecaster would have informed me of what's happened during the day and what are the causes or what's there in the atmosphere that would have caused that's the weather that we had today to occur. They would also tell me what they're expecting for the next 12 hours and also for the next week. So I have an idea of what to expect on my shift. I would then go through my charts. Now, meteorology is a science, so we have different charts, different types of charts. Like, for example, you look at your pressure charts, your winds, your relative humidity, your vertical velocity, and some other derived parameters such as vorticity and convergence. So I would look at those charts for the last shift and also for my shift and the time for which I'm expected to do the extended forecast. So I would continuously monitor the weather and send out, you have the different warnings that I was mentioning before for the aviation community, or if there's a very strong deviation from the previous forecast, then I would send out updates. Then I have to do my aeronautical forecasts and also the public forecasts. I have to do 2 aeronautical forecasts in the day and 2 at night, and then I'll do 1 public forecast in the day and 1 at night. So that is a typical operational day. In addition to that, you also have a lot of administrative things to do, just to ensure that the office runs efficiently. So that is, in a nutshell, what a typical day in the office for a meteorologist is.
Wow, that is a really packed day or night, I should say. So you got to be on your toes.
Yeah, well, those are the routines. You
Okay.
still have to deal with the public,
Okay.
because yes, so you'd have persons calling for a bit more specificity to the forecast,
Okay.
because we have a limited time and limited space to write the forecast. If I'm to write a forecast, a detailed forecast for the entire country, then you're talking about a thesis at the end of every shift. But that isn't possible. So we just have a little paragraph, a couple of sentences to tell you the weather for the entire country. Now,
Okay.
that might not be good enough for you. For example, you might be a rice farmer and you want a bit more specificity. So you would call and we would explain to you what to expect in your area over the time period that you might be requesting. Because you might say that, for example, we are currently in rice growing period. So a rice farmer might want to apply fertilizer to his field. So you would call and ask, what would the weather be like for the next couple of days, the next 3 or 4 days? Because they would prefer, when you're applying fertilizer, for there to be minimal rain. Because if there's too much of rain, then the fertilizer might just wash into the canals. So they would call and ask, well, I need a 3 days of good weather. So you tell them, okay, you would expect good weather from this period to this period, so that they could plan their activities. And likewise, in many aspects of farming, in especially rice farming, they might want to have a few days of sun to harvest, or they want a few days of rain to broadcast the seeds. So they would call and get that type of information. So you also have to answer questions from the public during that shift, or any one of your shifts at the desk. It doesn't matter if it's day or night. You might be called by an airline operator because they have a flight coming in and they would like to know what are the chances of fog being in the area at the time of arrival of the flight, or what is the chance of you having thunderstorm or hard rain, intense rain showers at the airdrome at the time of arrival. So you have to be feeling these different calls in your shifts, and it's far more hectic. You would appreciate whenever there is a lot of rainfall. So once it's raining a lot outside, you could rest assured that every few minutes someone will be calling the office for one reason or the other.
Okay, thank you so much for those details. And it sounds really packed and very physicsy, especially the fact that you mentioned it's charged with velocity and all these things. So my other question is, how is STEM or ICT integrated into your career?
No, as I mentioned before, meteorology is a science. Now, I should start by saying how you could become a meteorologist. Now, you could study a degree in meteorology. Now, that isn't being done at the University of Guyana. Your options are the University of the West Indies, which is very expensive for Guyanese. That's because we're not a contributing member to the University of the West Indies. So our fees are much higher than the other territories that would normally, who are members or contributing members to you. So that leaves China and Russia. So once you want to do a degree in meteorology, you'd have to go to China and Russia. Now, for you to be accepted into those universities, you need to have your maths, your physics, your chemistry. So it's a highly scientific field. So the same subjects or same requirements for your engineers and your doctors is the same requirements. Another way of doing it is that you could have a degree in physics or a degree in mathematics. So that goes to show that it's a STEM as STEM gets. It's high in the maths and physics. So that should that should give you an idea that yes, it is STEM. Of course, it's not that every day you're solving equations, but it's every day you're using those equations. I mentioned vorticity. Vorticity is in physics and even in maths, you might have done something called the curl. When you're talking about vectors, multiplication of vectors, there's a curl or the cross product of vectors. In meteorology, we call that a vorticity because that is a spin. That is spin in your regular mathematics. So it's more of using those mathematical and physical principles in your day-to-day. From the physics part, you have a lot of you have what is called a numeric weather predicting model because your weather is calculated. It's a calculation to get the winds and the relative humidity and these things. You do a calculation. So you have what we call an initial condition problem in physics. So I give you what are the conditions currently, and you have equations that would define how those conditions would evolve in space and time. So back to your secondary school physics question. There's a car driving on the road. It has a constant speed. Where would it be after 5 minutes? So they give you the velocity and they give you the time. So you use one of your equations, maybe S is equal to UT. This is the simplest one to solve that question. Or they might add a bit more and put some acceleration and what have you. So now imagine those questions. And for persons who would have gone to university or have done A levels, then you have what you call differential equations. Now, weather is described in differential equations. So those differential equations do not have what we call analytical answers, that there's no definite answer to it. You have to do a numeric solution, which would give you an approximation. So there's where the physics and the maths comes in to meteorology. Again, you don't have to physically do this calculation. You have computers that would do these calculations for you. You have supercomputers that would do these calculations for you. But you need to understand what is happening so that you could interpret what is it you're seeing. And you need to understand how it is done so that you would appreciate what are the limitations and what are the possible sources of error so that you could factor that into your forecast at the end of the day.
All right, thank you again for that detailed answer. The one thing I got from it is maths is a universal language or universal subject as needed in every area. And yeah. My other question is, if you weren't into STEM or ICT or meteorology, what field would you have been in and why?
Well, it would have still been STEM. As a child growing up, I was always the white child. Like I always had a question, I always had a rebuttal, and I was always inquisitive as to how things function. And for me, if it didn't make sense, if it wasn't logical, then it was incorrect. So from since I was little, I was that inquisitive one. I could remember shocking myself on multiple occasions. I could remember one time it was Christmas time, so you normally get your Christmas toys with the mottos. So as a scientist, I decided to take a a piece of fairy light wire. Now these fairy lights from back in the days, once you remove them from Christmas, you have to throw them away because once one bulb is damaged, then the whole thing is damaged. It wasn't these LEDs, but these normal incandescent bulbs. So I could remember stripping a piece of wire and connecting it to the motor and then putting it to the wall to see if the motor would spin. But the motor didn't spin, so I thought that current wasn't flowing. So I touched the wire and I was shocked as a child. So that was one of my vivid memories of me being very inquisitive and wanting to know how things work. I also remember making boats, like removing the motors from the cars and then putting it on a piece of styrofoam or something for it to be a boat and putting it in the water and these things that many kids of my age would have done while growing up. And some of these things never function. You want to know why. It was still later in life you realize that in the case of the motor, is that the motor is a direct current motor, a DC motor, and you're using alternating current. So for that to work, you would need to get a rectifying circuit. So they call a rectifying circuit to smooth out the sinusoidal wave of that AC current to make it DC. But again, as a primary school child, you didn't know better. Or why the boat keeps going around. It needs a rudder. If there's no rudder at the bottom, then it would just keep going around. So I've always been an inquisitive child. I always wanted to be in STEM. But later in life in secondary school, I think everyone goes through that phase where you start. So as you hear about these different careers and they sound interesting, you're kind of thinking that is something I can do. And just randomly, some of the careers, one was, well, since small, I wanted to maybe do medicine. But another one I briefly might have brushed over would have been an investigator. I think that might have been from the amount of movies with Perry Mason and Matlock, I think the name was. Perry Mason, Matlock, yeah. Those were the names. I think that might have, now you want to be an investigator. Then another time you wanted to be a pilot. Then another time I wanted to be a geologist. So those were different periods in life when the different things you would hear about these different professions. I said, okay, this sounds kind of interesting. So at the end of the day, I ended up doing a degree in physics and falling back on meteorology. So the meteorology thing was just came at me out of left field. It was just completely unplanned.
Okay, awesome. Well, I clearly feel that a lot of the youths would share the same views as well because you would be asked in class, what is it you want to become? And not everybody has an answer right away. They might just say, okay, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a pilot, but that is truly not what they want to be. So they just say something there to cover it. And they keep jumping from this aspiring career to another aspiring career until they actually settle on a career, of course. So it was nicely put, I must say, because I myself, I was in that phase. I wasn't sure what I wanted to become. So I didn't even give a response when they had asked me. I was still thinking about it. So thank you so
For
much
me,
for that.
I would like to give my input now. I kind of have the same mentality of the why. I kind of always question things when I was younger. Um, why do rain fall and all this? But as I grew older, I got the responses I needed, and it was same for the careers. I wanted to be a doctor, uh, and over time, I would have changed from being a doctor to wanting to be many other things. That's my input as well. Over to you, Stephanie.
I think a lot of time is not so much that the child or the person doesn't know what they want to be. It's just that they're in that phase of exploring and being influenced. Because as I said, my thing for becoming an investigator was from all these, you'd see these cool things that the investigators on these programs, Matlock and Perry Mason, would be doing, the things that they would find. At the end of the day, they were just police officers in to us here in Guyana. The equivalent would have been police officer, CID rank. And I could remember the geology part that was from the headmaster of the school. He had mentioned to us that one of his sons was a geologist. So that kind of like piqued my interest, and right away went and looked to find out what the career entailed. And for a short period, I must say, it had my attention. So I passed through the phase of wanting to be wanted to be a geologist. But sometimes it's just that we choose things that we see every day. And there's so many things that are, so many other careers that are out there that's, as I told a group of students last year for the last, there are careers out there for them that haven't been invented yet. That's a few years, something might appear that wasn't there previously. And that is the nature of STEMs. I mean, prior to the invention of computers, we hadn't computer scientists and programmers and all these data analysts and all this. Well, at least not in the form that we have them today. We hadn't these things. Meteorology is a relatively new science. Meteorology, I think, started after, I think, was the Second World War. Meteorology, as we know it today, started after the Second World War. After you had a lot of pilots from the Air Force moving into civil society and flying for civilian aircraft, civilian companies. Then you had meteorology kind of birthing out of that point in our history. So there are careers that aren't today, but tomorrow are possible, especially in the STEMs field. So there's nothing wrong with not knowing what you want to do. I went to school with persons that were in science class. They did A levels, lower six, upper six, were very good at science. And today they're lawyers. They're not even they're not even using the chemistry that they did. They're lawyers today and other professions that had nothing to do with chemistry and the chemistry, the maths and the physics that we did at A levels.
And this is the reason why we launched the podcast. You find that oftentimes you'd just stick to, I would call it, traditional careers.
Yeah.
And
Doctor and lawyer. Doctor,
correct,
lawyer,
yes.
policeman, nurses, yeah.
We want them to be able to get exposure to various careers. And even through the podcast, I've been hearing about some careers I've never heard of. We had a woman from Trinidad. She's a volcanologist, and to be honest with you, I've never heard of that career until I started doing some research and I found her online at a
Yeah.
conference. And I was shocked to know that there is such a career that's existing. And when I'm speaking to some youths now, they've never heard of it. So I had to get the video for them to listen to what she was saying, how she's a volcanologist, what her duties are, and all these things. So this is one of the reasons why we founded the podcast, to give youths more knowledge, especially in careers in STEM, because these are new careers and there are others that are going to be born very soon.
Yeah, well, that is where career guidance is important, because as you said, there are a few careers that everyone knows and everyone wants to be. And sometimes it's just societal pressure, maybe from your parents. Some parents might be living their dreams through their kids. They wanted to become a lawyer, they wanted to become a doctor, or they wanted to become an accountant. So that is what they want their kids to become. But there, as you said, there are things there that haven't been invented as yet, careers that have not been developed, careers that are being developed as we speak, that's in the years to come might become popular. Some of the ones that we have today might become obsolete. As a child, you had the donkey carts, persons going around with donkey carts. Now donkeys are allowed to roam freely. They're no longer the beast of burden. They're they're very they're very free. They have a lot of free time on their proverbial hands. They could do whatever they want. So things are changing, and especially as I said in the science and technology field. So it's it's alive. It's something that keeps evolving, and there will always be careers or space in the science and technology fields.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Now, I know we would have heard about the requirements and so on. Now, I want to ask you, what are some of the challenges you would have faced in this career?
Well, some of the main challenges would be in the time of studying. You have to study a bit more than your peers. I did mention that you could just go to university and do the meteorology, but most universities prefer students with some other background in meteorology. So your options are you could do a course in meteorology at the Regional Training Center in Barbados, the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, which is 18 months, and then you could do your degree. In China and Russia, it would be 5 years, 1 year learning the language and 4 years to actually do the career. So you would have had to put in that many more years into your studies. And then being such a specialized or such a niche career, there isn't much more you can do with it in the private sector. So you have to be a public servant. You have to be a public servant. So that is one of the challenges, not on a personal level, but as a career, anyone in the career, those are some of the things that you would find. When you're busy working, your colleagues might be, or busy studying, your colleagues might be doing something else. Because my background is not directly a degree in meteorology. I did a degree, as I said before, I did a degree in physics, then I did a diploma in meteorology. So there was a lot of time that your colleagues would be doing other things, and you have to be there burning the midnight oil, as you would say in Guyana. But it's something it's good to know from the inception, so that when you get in there, you don't become disenchanted. You know that this is what I'm getting myself into. This is not, it's like some of the other careers that it's a bit more light. Not that there aren't difficult things in other careers, but it's just that you would appreciate that if you're doing, for example, my career was 5 years, and I did maths from first year to the fifth year. I think just with a few more courses, like 1 or 2 semesters, I think, I would have been able to also graduate with a major in mathematics. So it would have been a double major because of the amount of mathematics that I would have done. So it was studying other careers they have this thing they say once you reach third year you graduate. But in my case, in my career, we had persons reaching fifth year and failing the thesis. So there was no time for relaxation until you get that piece of paper in your hand stating that your discussion was accepted and you've passed the discussion. There was no relaxation, unlike other careers, where once they reach third year, they're basically home and dry.
Okay, so I'm glad you talked about you have to let in other words, you have to let yourself know that this is what you signed up for. So
Yes,
along the way, as you say, you wouldn't want to fall off the bandwagon. So
correct.
I would just like you to add a little bit here. I think you gave a bit of some of the advice, but what advice would you give to youths who want to get into this field? I think you highlighted a main point there, but if you can like add,
In the meteorology field or in STEMs in the whole?
um, a bit of both, if that's
Okay.
okay.
For STEM, you must focus on your core subjects. And your core subjects would be your maths, your physics, your chemistry, biology, agri, geography, and of course your English. For good measure, you could also throw in a bit of, I call them culture subjects. So they're more for the molding of the person as a part of society. That would be your history, which is very important, something I did not do in school. Or maybe a foreign language, uh, maybe some music. You try to get that well-rounded individual. So those are the subjects that you would definitely need. You would also need to have a lot of discipline. That isn't just for the STEM subjects, but any career, you need more discipline. For me, discipline is as important as, or even more important than just raw intelligence. Because if you're just smart and not disciplined, I don't think you might be able to reach very far. So you need to be disciplined, and it's good to get that discipline from very young. Because as I said, if you're in a university where your career is the first to start and the last to finish, when you get into class, everyone is there just as we say, just liming and keeping it cool. You might be tempted to go and join them, because some of them might be your peers from your village, from your secondary school, or you might have met them sometime in life. So you might be tempted to go and you might have that assignment and then you might have that lab to complete, that report to do, but you just decide, I'm going to go with the crowd. You're smart, but you're not disciplined enough to get the work done. So you might just take 5 minutes to do it, and there is when you have all the errors being committed, or you might not do it at all. So if you're not disciplined enough, then that would be a very big issue. Do not be afraid that, as we said before, you don't know what is it you want to do as yet. You're not very sure as what you want to do as yet. Keep an open mind. I always say, look on the brighter side. Take your lemons and make lemonade. If something pops up that you weren't thinking about, maybe it's something that you might want to try or learn about. But sometimes some persons, you're so laser focused on one thing that you fail to see the other things that might be as good as or even better than what you're originally focused on. So be open minded. Be willing to pivot as soon as the opportunity presents itself. For the meteorology in specific, it's a bit of the same, but you'd also need to be able to communicate properly. Communicate with your peers and also with persons who are not in your field, non-meteorologists. Because as I mentioned earlier, we have to speak to farmers. So you have to be able to tell farmers, give farmers that information, communicate effectively with the farmers. You must be able to communicate, not just with farmers. You have to communicate with pilots, other airline operatives, whether it be the dispatcher, the loader, the person's loading the aircraft, any other flight crew. You must be able to communicate with them properly. So you do have a public facing aspect of your job. Maybe other careers, if you're, let's say, you're a programmer, computer programmer, you don't really need to be out there to speak to the public and let them know what's going on. Maybe it's just sufficient for you to communicate with your peers so you could speak one language. You speak that technical language and they understand you. But as a meteorologist, it's not quite so. You have to be able to explain to persons who are non-meteorologists in non-technical terms. Sometimes the terms we use may seem technical, but when you get to understand what we're saying, they're everyday words that persons use in their day-to-day. For example, when we say scattered or isolated persons, they say, well, what does that mean? Well, it means the same thing, or we use it the same way that you would use it in your everyday life. For example, the rice fell and scattered across the ground or something. So you have a picture in your mind. It's not everywhere. It's not covering everywhere, but you have some empty space, or it's isolated. It means one here and another, a far distance or time from the present place and time. So back to the question, it's communication. You have to be able to communicate properly with your peers and with non-meteorological persons. And patience. You need a lot of patience. Maybe in any career, but the aspect of dealing with the population and also dealing with a science that is not the most exact of sciences, you have to be patient.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. Well, I know that three things that stood out there. It's the communication, it's the discipline, of course, and it's the patience. So mostly the patience. So I'm going to hand you over to Brad now.
I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. And like Stephanie said, I would say some gems were dropped. One, remember your whys, because on the days when it gets, I would say, exhausting, you get burnt out, you want to give up, you have to remember why you started this, why you want this career. You have to be disciplined enough to keep going. Even to the example Mr. Alves used, there are times when your friends might not be going to class. They might be going somewhere else, but you know you have to go to class, or you have to get an assignment done. You have to be disciplined enough to know what to do, and you have to be able to communicate and communicate effectively. And even when you speak, you have to speak so everybody can. I would say for everybody understand. Um, or as you would say, usually a man term that everybody can understand. You don't have to repeat yourself twice. Because in public health, we do a lot of training. And if you're going to use the big terms of microbiology, then they're going to ask you, sir, what does that mean? So when you're speaking, you just necessarily use layman's terms. Or there are times when you might have to use scientific jargons, but you try your best to, I would say, break it down to for everybody can understand. And you have to be patient. I don't know, but you just have to be patient. I think not just career-wise, but school-wise as well. You have to be patient. So, Mr. Alves, thank you for sharing with us today. I would say I learned a lot. I'm sure Stephanie can say the same.
Same here.
We learned a lot today. So thank you for sharing with us. For our viewers, be sure to follow us on social media. That is Facebook and Instagram at Stemmy.conversations. And on the major podcasting sites, Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Digital School Loud at Stemmy Conversations, and on YouTube at Stemmy Conversations. Do have a great evening. Thank you.